Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is a pleasure, as always, I say that every time, to come your way with New Paradigms for a New World. We're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m. for our special edition of Tell Me Your Story. And then Monday through Friday, we're here from 8 to 9 a.m. following the news, and we stream live at all those times at richarddugan.com. Podcasts are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM. We are on YouTube as well. We hope you'll subscribe and then click notifications so when I post a new conversation, you'll be notified and you can tune in and hopefully be entertained, inspired, educated, encouraged in some of those formats to do more to make this a better world for yourself and for the people around you, and hopefully for everybody. That's what our goal is, to make this a better place for all people, not just a select few. We also ask that if you can support the work we're doing financially, we would be gratefully appreciative. We have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask you to whom are you sending this, email richard@richarddugan.com. That's the address you'll put in there. Email address is richard@richarddugan.com. And finally, during this, the Decade of Perfect Vision, we ask you to take some time to yourself, for yourself, self-care, if you will, to spend time going within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place, listening to that still, small voice. Today's program is going to focus on a wonderful book that our special guest is joining us to talk about. And her name is Penelope Holt, and her book is called Angel Scroll. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Richard.
This is interesting. When I first read the title, I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to really like this. And of course, it's very interesting. It is as it says here, it is a captivating novel that spans the ages, and it's blending mystery with romance as well as a spiritual quest. So we don't want to give too much away because we want people, of course, obviously, to get a copy of the book. But give us a quick synopsis, and then we're going to dive into some other subjects that are related to this particular work that you have. So give us a quick rundown about the Angel Scroll.
Well, like most people, I've been a seeker, and I've, trodden many different paths to try to have a greater understanding of why we're here and what we're doing. So the central character of the book is a young woman. She's a painter. She's widowed. And in deep mourning, she starts to have visions. And she dreams of Jesus in India at the deathbed of a young woman, but he doesn't heal the woman. He leaves her to die. And she paints this heartbreaking scene. And then she finds out that and it's a masterpiece way above her usual level. She finds out that her painting is one of 3 paintings predicted by the Angel Scroll. And that when these 3 paintings are collected together, that they'll create miracles for a broken world, for the new age. And the Angel Scroll was allegedly a real Dead Sea Scroll that was discovered in the 1990s. The original scrolls, as you may know, were discovered in 1947 to, I think, 56, thousands of pieces of parchment dating back 3 centuries, up to 3 centuries before Christ. So they found this new one on the Jordanian side of the Dead Sea in the 90s, and it was reported in the Jerusalem Post and AP and a lot of news outlets. And scholars said that they'd seen drawings of it, that it provided a tour of heaven, a lot of mystical angel imagery, and some apocalyptic imagery. And as the years went by, they began to think that it really didn't exist because they couldn't, discover more about it and get their hands on it. But I thought it was a great jumping off point if the scroll, and I took creative license, would predict these 3 paintings and predict this miracle. So the catalyst for the woman, obviously, is her grief. She begins to have supernatural experiences, visions, which is not uncommon when people are going through deep existential crisis. So she sets out looking for these paintings, and she's with a Benedictine monk. She meets a Buddhist monk. She gets all kinds of explanations for what's happening to her. And it's sort of reminiscent of the Da Vinci Code in that it They go to Israel, they go to Europe, Rome, and it brings together a lot of fringe, religious ideas or historical claims that have been on the fringes, that Jesus spent some of his hidden years in India, that he was an Essene, and that the Essenes were influenced by Egyptian mysteries through Moses, which was in turn influenced by Hinduism. So it's all of the interconnecting of the roots of various religious traditions and practices at that time in history, geographically so close. So it goes to Glastonbury Tor and the search for the Holy Grail, and all of the, myths around Arthurian legend and Joseph of Arimathea evangelizing England. So it's a book. I wrote the book that I'd want to read, and I also wrote a book about how a modern person tries to find the truth and a spiritual truth and a path for themselves, which is what the lead character, Claire Lucas, is trying to do. So that's the book in a nutshell.
And of course, you incorporate a lot in there, and it's interesting that, you have so much in there, especially in reference to the some of the philosophical teachings of different philosophies. And I'm always been intrigued in that regard because, well, actually, I don't know why. It's just I am intrigued. And then I worked for 15 years back in the 80s and early 90s for a Christian radio station. And a lot of what I was told didn't make any sense. I mean, I was asking all of these questions, and well, just read the founding fathers, the writings, and because they've asked these questions, and they have the answers, and none of them made any sense. I mean, the answers made no logical sense to me. And there was a period of 5 years that I worked very hard to eliminate from my mind and my soul, if you will, the concepts of the devil and hell. Because to me, it's that concept smacks of extortion. God created me, and now, unless I conform to this philosophy, I'm going to hell. I'm going to burn for eternity. It's like, really? I thought he loved me, that kind of thing. Yeah. So I've asked these questions, and it sounds to me like you have been searching and asking these questions as well. I've been asking since I was 17, basically, even before I was working there. And I'm 64 now, and I love these quests. I've read the Da Vinci Code a couple of times, and I've also watched the movie, which, by the way, as I was reading it, the movie was playing out in my mind. And when the actual movie came out, it blew me away. I'm going, wait a minute, how did they get that out of my head? It looks just like my movie version.
Your imagination.
Exactly. Is there a particular philosophy that you lean to, or do you have one of your own, shall we say, of your own creation that you, because I know a lot of people, they will say, well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, and somehow to me, because I sort of adhere more to the biblical definition of true religion, and that is taking care of the widows and the orphans, or if you want to broaden it, taking care of one another, being kind to one another. That is true religion, not the steeples and the doctrine and dogma and so forth. So I'm curious about your philosophy, and I'm guessing that it's probably borne out in the pages of the Angel Scroll.
Yeah, I think so. I grew up in England. My mother was the Protestant Church of England. My dad came from a Catholic family, but was an atheist. I think more for not a deeply considered atheist, but just didn't, cleave to any religion. Went to Catholic school when I was 13, convent school. I was actually baptized a Catholic there. I didn't like the dogma, but I did love the liturgy. I do think there's something beautiful about the liturgy of the Mass. I think there's transcendence. And I really loved the moral framework. The nuns were beautiful people. They were none of these bad, naughty nuns that hit kids that you read about. And we would go to Lourdes on pilgrimages, and we would have November charities. And it really gave you a sense of community, and like you said, taking care of the widows and the orphans. And I think I still have a lot of attachment to Christianity, but specifically, I always come back to, if you want to quote scripture, and people do, they quote scripture for all kinds of purposes, but Jesus said, I leave you with two commandments, didn't he? To love God and to love one another.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems pretty simple, straightforward instruction to me, to love God and to love one another. So if those were Christ's two commandments, they work for me. And then I became very interested in Buddhism because it's a sort of a very psychological practice. It is not theistic. They don't believe in a God. They believe in the nature of consciousness and enlightenment, and that our fundamental nature is good, and that we're sort of shrouded in ignorance, and that by studying self-analysis, that we will be able to clear up our confusion. And they actually have this great taxonomy of the brain and your emotions and your thoughts and how to change your thoughts. And I like that. I like that they do this active mind training, telling yourself you're bad, bad, bad. And, getting all wrapped up in dogma doesn't necessarily fix. What fixes you is understanding sort of how you work and how you're. And I think ultimately people who are destructive in the world start off by being self-destructive, right? You're kind of getting in your own way, and that leads to you sort of causing the chaos around you. So I found I really got a lot out of studying on Buddhism. And then it just took me into comparative religion and just looking at what, to your point, what do other good people in the world, good people, right, who are doing their best for themselves and their fellow men, what do they believe?
Mm-hmm.
Why do they believe it? And I appreciate people who are certain that they can say with absolute conviction that they know what the truth is. I can't. I'd love to be able to,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't stand here and grandstand and say I know definitively what you should believe. I think that you should just point yourself in the direction of the highest good, and keep and seek. And as the Christians say, it's the fruit of the tree. You shall know them by their fruits, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if people are doing good, then it means they're, I think, moving along the right path. But I know some Christians. The part about Jesus being in India. What was interesting to me is we sort of start in Christianity. I mean, of course, we study the Old Testament, but I don't know that many people go back and really understand the roots of Judaism and Christianity, and early Christianity and its ties to India and to Egypt and all of these other. The Essenes, for example, they believe that Jesus may have been an Essene. There were three sects in his time. There's the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. And the Essenes were separatists, and they worshipped a solar calendar. They did not go to the temple. They thought it was defiled. They did not believe in animal sacrifice or murder. They believed in reincarnation. They were very, very much influenced by Hinduism. And so it's interesting to know that those are some of the beliefs and the that were influencing people at the time. I mean, they lived in a context, they lived in history, they lived, it's not necessarily how we project back and think it was. So I'm very curious about that.
Oh, as am I. The one thing the one theory anyway, or at least perspective that I have when it comes to, you use the term comparative religions, is that no, and I prefer to use the word philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
There's no one philosophy that came out of a vacuum. And I was watching a documentary just the other day that started to go down this list of things that were similar from one belief system or philosophy to the next, to the next, to the next, and then showed how it then shows up in the current version, if you will, of Christianity. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I'm, I wasn't there, obviously, but I just find it so interesting that there was an interview that I did, oh my gosh, back 35 years ago with a Christian musician. His name was John Fisher. And I'd interviewed him a couple of times prior. He's written a number of books. He's got several albums and so forth back in those days. And he was, we were talking on the phone from his home. He was in his home in New England.
Mm-hmm.
And he was sharing a wonderful insight that I was so impressed by. It gave me hope for the future. And he said that he got to a point in his life sitting there looking out the window at the falling leaves in autumn. And he started to ask himself the question, is what I believe what I believe, or what I was told and taught to believe? And bear in mind, he grew up in the Jesus movement of the late 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone to start asking that question, and it's not it wasn't so much, I'm confused or what have you. It was, what do I really believe? What's mine?
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to separate, though, isn't it? Because we're introduced to all of these different philosophies by, parents and educators. And, if we are involved in some church or what have you, or synagogue, or, a lot of this is shared with us. And, we're told this is the truth and what have you. But we do finally get to that point, and it's almost along the lines, Penelope, and I'm wondering what your thought is, almost of, well, why am I here? Where am I going? How did I get here in the first place? Not certainly not the scientific or biological answers. Those are
Mm-hmm.
easy. It is the metaphorical or metaphysical or spiritual questions.
Yeah, and I'm glad you touched on that, because I really I'm very curious. I mean, I don't know why we get pulled towards certain subject matter rabbit holes, but and I've spoken about this before, and it is in the book that Claire's doctor thinks that she's having these visual disturbances because she's got a brain aneurysm. It's very materialist, it's very physical. There's a lot of new physics and new science now that is sort of in the West. I think the East is always sort of, if you look at Buddhist tradition, there's kind of been a marriage of science and soul, whereas it was bifurcated during the Enlightenment. The church didn't want you saying that the sun, the earth went around the sun. They needed to, they burned you at the stake. It was heresy, right? They believed that the earth was at the center. So they sort of warned the scientists to, you deal with the material world and we'll deal with the spiritual world. But a lot of physicists now are actually believing that consciousness is the fundamental of reality, that everything emerges from consciousness, that, your body, your consciousness doesn't emerge from your mind or your body, but rather that your body is a projection of consciousness. So Donald Hoffman, Bernardo Kastrup, Stephen C. Myers, who's a philosopher of science, wrote a great book called Signature in the Cell, where he's looking at DNA and he's seeing that it's coded, it's designed, it's an argument for intelligent design. He believes in God, but it's not a creationist belief. He's just saying that science doesn't study the paranormal, right? It does. If you can't measure God, well, then we can't measure God, so we're not going to study it, right? We're only going to study scientifically, empirically, the things that we can observe in nature. So, point being that I think physics is become, the metaphysics and physics are sort of uniting, and scientists, physicists, philosophers are really trying to grasp metaphysics and what's always been in the realm of spirituality, I would say. And to your point, I have met in the US atheists who grew up in very fundamentalist homes, and were very I'm quite surprised at how vehement they are about rejecting. I think fundamentalism of any kind can have a dark side. And my experience with Christianity wasn't like that at all. I went to this Catholic school and it was very loving, and it was a very positive experience. And I've met people who felt that their Christian upbringing was judgmental, it was harsh, they were hurt by it, they ran away from it. And I think that's a shame. And it goes back to what you were saying about if something hurts in particular, you start to question it. And then it leads to that other question of how much of this have I really come to through my own inquiry versus being, dogma that's been drilled into me. And something positive I think about Buddhism is the Buddha said, don't take anything on faith. Follow follow what I'm saying. And if you don't experience it and it is not true for you, throw it out. So there is no dogma that you'll go to, if you don't believe this, you'll go to hell. Everything is about inquiry and exploration into the nature of your own consciousness. And that ain't a bad thing, if you ask me.
No, it's not. I actually took a different tack in terms of answering that question in terms of, what is the right path? And I approached it from the standpoint, as a human being, we have maybe millions of different foods that we can eat or combinations thereof, where there are the same number of beverages, liquids, and so forth. As far as education, I can go to any school I want and become whatever I want. I can live in a myriad of different places on the planet. I can play a myriad of different games or no games and just play whatever I want. And then the list goes on of all of the different attributes of being human. And yet, and this is because I'm always coming from that logical perspective, and yet there's only one way to God. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. And so and something that you said just a moment ago that epitomizes a phrase that I was given at the age of 21, because I was feeling a little full of myself, because I was searching. I had started my search at 17. I was 21. And someone said to me, I think this is the best advice anybody ever gave me, and that was this: it is better to begin in doubt and end in certainty than to begin in certainty and end in doubt. And when you talk about the fundamentalist in any philosophy, they're going to end in doubt. Because we have found over the centuries, have we not, that many of the quote unquote truths that were foisted upon us as the peasants, we found out now through science they're not true. We're not the center of the universe. The Earth isn't, and the sun isn't, and nor is our solar system. We're part of a vast universe of, they're just going to throw a number out of trillions upon trillions of stars and planets. And I also find it the arrogance of man to think that we're the only ones, really. I just, it's like, so this is the Goldilocks planet in the universe. I just, that doesn't make any sense. And also that we're alone. I'm curious about your perspective. Are we, from your observation, are we alone, or are there others that that we are sort of, how do I put this, that we're sharing the universe with as a point?
Well, I have a slightly different perspective, and I haven't got it quite worked out. That I like to listen to Bernardo Kastrup. I'm always plugging Bernardo Kastrup. He has a PhD in computer science. He built computers, and he went to work at CERN in the Great Hadron Collider, and he was a total materialist, non-spiritual, very cynical. Then he got a PhD in philosophy, and he had the exact same insight that your friend did. He just said, how much of what I believe is what I really believe versus studying from a very scientific materialist background, right? And so his perspective is that consciousness is everything. So there really isn't anything out there. Everything is in here. So, Donald Hoffman as well. And I'm not so tickety-boo on the physics, but they're proving now that at the Planck scale, We live in a 3-dimensional world with a 4th dimension of space-time, but at the 10 minus 35, when you start getting down to, quantum, matter disappears, and it becomes fields of energy, right? So when you start questioning space and you start questioning time, it puts a completely different lens on things. And maybe, Hoffman says that we're conscious agents that are interacting. So how much is there really a universe out there? It looks real, it feels real, it seems vast. There seems like there are trillions of planets, but we're measuring it through our consciousness. Everything is measured through consciousness. And a very simple-minded insight that I had as a kid, and I've spoken about this before, is I remember thinking, why can't I see why can't I see as far away as a telescope? Why can't I see as closely as a microscope, right? Why do we only see in the blue range, right? We don't see infra. We can't see quantum. Our physical senses force us to perceive the world, to cognize it, just based on what our senses and our brain can. We don't see the thing itself. Right. We just see what's filtered through our senses. So right there, that says to me, how can we be so certain? We can't even, we see but a fraction, a fraction of a minuscule of a fraction. Why are we so arrogant that we figured out that we know what everything is, when we can't even, and yeah, we can do mathematics and equations, and the equations seem to bear out. But even when I've got friends who are, hardcore physicists, they've got PhD, they went to Stanford, and they just don't seem to grasp that everything they perceive, they are perceiving through consciousness, right? And they're not looking at the thing itself, they're looking at something that's, filtered and cognized in their brain. So I'm sure someone's got a very good explanation and can talk me out of that, but it seems like a big question to me.
It does indeed, and it's fascinating the ideas that we come up with, and where they come up with, where they come from. I have been doing this program now for 17 years. Anniversary is coming up in September, and I have said this from the very beginning, because I've been asked, Richard, could you provide us with a list of questions? No, I can't, because the universe asks the questions. I'm just along for the ride. And I've been given a very curious mind, and that's where the questions come from, a combination thereof. I've had interviews where there's a question that's in the back of my mind, or that was placed there, if you will. And internally during the interview, I'm going, no, I'm not going to, no, that has nothing to do with what we're talking. That's not relevant. It will not go away. So in the middle of the interview, I didn't stop the interview, but I says, I got to stop here, and I have to ask this question, because if I don't, it's going to force me to ask a question somewhere down the road. And so I asked the question. I wish I could remember what the question was, but it was relevant to what we were talking about nonetheless. So, and it's the same thing, I think, with we'll call it the expressions of art. And quite honestly, I think books are the same. Books are they are an art form in and of themselves. Now, you've written a few books. I am looking at publishing my very first, coming up in September, the anniversary of our program. It's really, really very interesting how, that process, it evolves from the standpoint that in the beginning, we tap into it, but we're not really, sure where it's coming from. And the more we tap into it, the more we begin to understand where it is coming from. And we recognize we're connected with the divine, that, if you will, higher power. I prefer to use the term creator, without anthropomorphizing. And also recognizing that there's nothing new under the sun. Everything that has been, is, and will be has already been. And that's one of those conundrums, of course, when we start talking about time, in terms of, we think linearly, when in fact there is no time, you
But
know.
our human brains just can't, Donald Hoffman's talking about there's a fundamental reality and that's projecting, and space-time is a projection, but it is not the basement floor, But our minds can't, we can intuit it. I get a feeling of it. And when people are talking about reincarnation, I'm like, if there is no linear time, do we keep reliving? Do we keep experiencing different lives, or is it just flashes of, how does it work when you take on the idea that there may be no space or time and that there's just an eternal now? It's very hard for your mind to compute because all of our experience is living in these 4 dimensions, right? So, but I think I find God more in what we're talking about, Richard, in that sense of consciousness, unified, nothing is separate. The ideal, that we may just all be a thought in the mind of God, that there may be a mind at large and we're just a compartmental. I like that idea. And part of writing this book was, when we're little kids, we're so curious. What you were saying about curiosity, I'd say that's my superpower, that I'm curious. I like to quote Dorothy Parker, who said that the cure for boredom is curiosity, and there is no cure for curiosity. That when we're little kids, we're always saying, but why, but why, but why, but why? And then as we get older, we just sort of satisfied that we've read a bunch of books, we've gone to a bunch of schools, we've talked to a bunch of people with credentials, appeal to authority, right? That we can stop asking why. And then, we get these, you shouldn't ask that, you shouldn't believe that, you shouldn't be entertaining that. That's a heresy. That's, but I think that everything is an act of imagination. We're talking through a computer screen. If someone hadn't been curious and said, I wonder if we, skyscrapers, rocket ships, penicillin, all of it begins as an act of imagination, and which tells me, we know that the fundamental reality is creation, right? It's their acts of creation. And we've gone from no civilization to this incredible creative, the power of this creative force that has imagined all of these things that we've made manifest and are now real. So to me, curiosity and creativity are the building blocks of reality. And you should go for, I think people should indulge their creativity and they should indulge their curiosity. And writing books is certainly a way to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're talking with Penelope Holt, and she has a book that we are sort of featuring on this particular program, and it has to do, or I should say has to do, the title, of course, is The Angel Scroll. And it's going to challenge you as the reader. You can find out more by going to PenelopeHolt.com. That's PenelopeHolt.com. We'll be linked to that website for folks to certainly take a look at a book trailer as well as learn more. You can go again to PenelopeHolt.com. The conversations that I have had over the years along the lines of consciousness, in trying to understand, number one, what it is. Is it the voices or the thoughts and so forth that I have going on in my mind? Is it that place that one goes to, as I mentioned at the front end of the program, encouraging people to go within and listening to that still small voice? Do we take the experiences that we have in this lifetime with us into the next realm, if you will? Not necessarily a lifetime, because again, if you're one who accepts and believes in reincarnation, although I will tell you that an interesting twist on reincarnation, though this twist didn't change anything, I have a copy of a book that was given to me when I was 21 by a dear friend of mine who has since passed, called The Impersonal Life. And in it, it talks about, and it's like God talking to you, or your higher self talking to you. And it was channeled through a gentleman by the name, I believe his name was James Banner, in the 30s, the 1930s. Okay. And it basically says you think that when you go through past life regressions that you're tapping into those other lives that you have lived, that you
Mm,
have inhabited the body and so forth. I tell you that you are tapping into lives that I have manifested, that I created, just as I created you.
mm,
So it isn't a question of you having been Cleopatra or Napoleon or Hitler or a peasant, or a sailor or whatever, whatever you want to put in there. It's not that you lived those lives. It's that when you go through that regression, you're just tapping into the experiences of my manifestation.
that's
And I,
so that's what I was really getting at. That
yeah,
if we're all one and it's all sort of a shared but
yeah,
divided experience, then maybe these are just experiences that are available, just like you can pick a movie off the shelf and watch it, right? Maybe it isn't that you temporarily went through that life, but that you're just getting a glimpse into an experience that you feel is yours, but it's
yeah.
just a manifest experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And yet,
I like to read that because I've been struggling with that idea. I've been really thinking about that and trying to square it. There's reincarnation in the book.
Mhm.
And I certainly believe that people remember accurately. It's been proved, and we see it with savants. I just saw a video of some 5-year-old playing some virtuoso piano players with these tiny little hands. I mean, it was just inconceivable. And you look at this stuff and kids who remember things, but how much of it are they remembering a personal experience? How much are they tapping into something that is a universal or just a manifest consciousness?
Well, I tell you, when I started to ponder it in reference to some of the other aspects of reincarnation and actually having lived those other lives as compared to only tapping into, I'm going, well, it really doesn't change anything because isn't the point of going through a past life regression therapy session to learn something about self?
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily to know that, oh yeah, I was this other person and that's real important and I need to play that up. No, we're here to learn. Uh from your perspective, because it sounds to me like you would be here. There's no right or wrong, good or bad. There are only life lessons or learning experiences. I even make that differentiation in my book that when someone tells you that you're wrong, you're not wrong. It's just that in this world and under these circumstances, that doesn't work. And it's just like the example many times used of Edison and his invention of the light bulb.
Yeah.
He didn't make 900 and some odd mistakes. He wasn't wrong 900 times. He just found 900 ways that the light bulb didn't work
Yeah.
until he did.
I like the Buddhist idea too, and I that there is no self, that we're all just sort of we are an awareness, sort of experiencing these composite. We have a emotional process, we've got a physical process, we've got a mental process, and we think it's us, but it's not. It's sort of we've through biology or DNA, nature, we're born with this personality. I've got family in the UK and nephews and nieces, and they're like my kids. I mean, they're geographically apart, but genetically they smile the same way. They got the same laugh. They have the same sense of humor. So just this idea that you've sort of inherited this experience, at least, of a body, a physical process, emotional processes, mental processes. The Buddhists say that you don't have your thoughts have you, and you think it's me, but it's not you. It's just you're just aware of this physical being. You're aware of these emotions that arise. You're aware of these thoughts that arise, and you attach to them, and that you think that they are you.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing, and that really, that goes to you know, with mind training, you can certainly stand back, which is what Buddhists do. They watch the thoughts arise, they create the space so that if it's a destructive thought, you can change it with a more positive thought, which comes back to what you're saying about right and wrong. I think some of the original definition of virtue and vice was not a moral judgment per se. It was just virtue will lead you towards peace and happiness, and vice will lead you towards misery. So just as if you eat spoiled food, you're going to get an upset stomach. If you indulge bad thoughts or you indulge bad behavior, it's probably going to make you mentally unwell, or it's going to disrupt your peace, right? You're going to be diseased. You're going to be dis-ease. And so that what I like about Buddhism, it's really just saying, watch your thinking, watch your emotions, and train yourself in the direction of you refer to it in the Christian way, that still small voice of conscience, right? Try and tune into that thing that's going to lead you towards the thing that's going to make you feel peaceful, optimistic, joyful. Your vibration is going to be good. You know, it's going to have an effect in the world. So I prefer to see it in that way rather than with heavy judgment or heavy morality.
And you know, it's interesting to observe when someone is doing that. I go back to, and again, I try not to reference the person's name just because it evokes such negative energy. But back in June of 2015, this individual came on the world stage and began making these pronouncements, and continued to do so through and to this day. And as I'm listening to the words coming out of this person's mouth, I'm thinking, this person can't keep this up. I mean, there's going to come a breaking point because it was so negative, you know. And yet there's also another aspect here that we can talk about, and that is, and maybe that's this person's role, because there was a point where I had to acknowledge this person, and I actually had to say it out loud. Thank you, teacher, for teaching me how not to be. And the fact of the matter is that we're all teachers and students of and for one another. And I wonder sometimes about what we create, especially with our words. Now, I'm a firm believer that words have power. They have great power. I mean, you think, yeah. I mean, you look at the beginnings of the book of Genesis. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And through the Word, things were brought into creation. And it was said, and they were good. And then man got a hold of them, and they weren't quite as good as they were. And even man was good up until a certain point. But I'm wondering about that in terms of especially conversations that we are all having and observations that we are all making of events that are happening in the world, both today and in the past. You put words down on paper. If, you know, I'll use that euphemistically because you probably use a computer and there's no paper involved unless someone wants a printed copy. If it's on Kindle or it's Audible, that kind of thing. But still, words have power. Do you think about that as you are writing, or do you just, you know that the words are going to be okay, they're going to be fine, and you just let them flow?
I do, but I think, you know, Terence, the great Roman poet philosopher, said, "Nothing human is alien to me." And I think we have to be careful of projection and shadow and self-righteousness. And so I think there's great merit in looking at the darkness within. As I get older, I see there is more benefit in interrogating the darker aspects of my personality. I really, you know, I think we're in need of remedies across the board. I mean, I think we talked about, some people who are very religious and yet can be quite spiteful. So I think it's not just the words. I think it's the awareness of really deeply knowing yourself and being willing to, take the beam out of your own eye. Because Jung would say that if somebody disturbs you and triggers you, that it could be and I'm not saying that it is, but it could be a projection. It could be an aspect of yourself that you've disassociated with. Very often it is not at all. It's true discernment. But I do think people don't spend enough time interrogating their own, darkness. And they think that because they think certain things and say certain things that make that, and they, for that certain causes, that makes them good people. And I think that, Carl Jung said, I don't want to be good, I want to be whole. And so to me, wholeness is very important. And I just get more, they talk about eating your own vomit. I just get, as I get older, I just get more, when you're younger, you want to project a good image. I'm a good person. Well, I try to be a good person. Sometimes I'm not a good person. And I've got to be aware of that so I can work on it. And, in the Bible, they talk about the whited sepulchres. There's whited on the outside and there's corruption within. So I think on the spectrum, there's a spectrum of things that are happening in society, a conflation of a lot of ills, a lot of good and a lot of ill. And, people are trying to find their way through it. That's kind of the way I see it.
We are talking with our very special guest, Penelope Holt, all the way from New York City, New York. And we're talking about her latest work, which is The Angel Scroll. You also wrote a book called The Apple. Tell us that's based upon some rather interesting material as well.
Yeah. There was a Holocaust survivor called Herman Rosenblatt. He was, I think, in the first grade when the war broke out, and he spent his childhood in ghettos and Nazi concentration camps. So he had a real Holocaust Shoah story. And then he had a second grade education. He wound up coming to America. He was Polish, a Polish Jew, and he became an electrician. And then he fabricated this little romantic story that he met his wife, the wife that he met in Brooklyn, when she was a little girl, threw apples to him when he was in a concentration camp. And he won a competition in the New York Post, I think a Valentine's Day competition for the most romantic story. And then he was in a book called Chicken Soup for the Soul. And long story short, he winds up on Oprah Winfrey. And Oprah called this the greatest love story ever told. And Penguin rushed to do a book about it. And then all of the historians came forward and just said, this is not true. This is not possible. He certainly was in these camps. It was recorded. He was there with his 4 brothers. He was finally liberated from Theresienstadt at the end of the war. But this story about the little girl throwing apples is an absolute fiction. And he was under a lot of pressure. And he finally said yes, that he had fabricated that piece. And it was a big cause célèbre. I think it was the second time that Oprah had an author on, I think James Fry, who did A Million Little Pieces, had written a biography about drug addiction and taken some liberties. And so, there's a lot of, in how you categorize fiction and nonfiction, how far can you, I don't know if anyone who writes a biography writes the absolute truth. It's all typically about, it's the rare person that writes an unvarnished version. But there's a difference between sort of glossing over things and actually fabricating. And James Fry had done this. And so someone approached me and said, would you write? I wound up writing the story behind the story. So his true story of being a little boy and going through the camps, and then the story of how he fabricated this fiction, and embellished his story, and how everybody turned against him. And, it was an embarrassment for Oprah, and he made a lot of people angry. He made everybody angry, actually. So And that was a rough book to write. I wrote it, I had to write very quickly. I was on a deadline, and I had to study the Holocaust, and particularly what happened to children during the Holocaust and the war. It was such a destructive, dark period. And then, subsequently what happened to him. And so it was interesting. It was sort of culturally of the moment. It was not a happy experience. And then I wrote a book about a biography with Alan Bailey, who founded the Harlem Gospel Choir. And that was a little bit more uplifting because Alan had an amazing story. He was up in Harlem. He knew Miles Davis and Nina Simone and Muhammad Ali and the Jacksons. And he just had this very interesting life. And he was part of the civil rights movement, very interesting time in American culture. So that was a little more uplifting than the other one. But this book is represents my deepest interests. It's more personal because it just represents a lot of the thinking and seeking and research and my own personal interest in trying to figure out my path and what I believe, and separating out, as you said, what my own curiosity from what I've been told. Of course, what you're told, you can sort of swallow whole. When you go searching for answers yourself, it's a little bit more, there's more of a question mark, right? If the experts haven't told you and you can't take it to the bank as gospel, but you're just sort of like trying to feel your way along yourself, then you should I think this? How does it stack up against what I've been told? So, but I don't mind that. I like that. I like that kind of inner exploration. I can't imagine just swallowing things whole and marching along like a good little robot.
Well, I myself, being born and raised Catholic and also being exposed to the Eastern Rite of the Catholic Church, the Byzantine Rite, with a wonderful liturgy as well. I've always loved the ritual, the ceremony, and so forth. And that's one of the things that has always that's one of the things I loved about the church.
Yeah.
And I have to say that there were some clergy that were very honest with me. I remember a Monsignor of the Byzantine Rite who I questioned the crucifixes, the images of the crucifix. And I said, well, I don't understand. According to what I've read about the historical evidence of crucifixions, individuals were usually stripped naked. They were not wearing a stitch of clothing up on the cross. Why does Jesus have a covering? And he was very honest with me, and he said, it's because we don't want to upset the sensibilities of the people. And the first thing that came to my mind was the passage, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, there's something wrong here, among other things, but that one was rather intriguing. But at least he had the willingness to be honest with me in that regard. And it's like, to me, it would have been better from the beginning if they just been honest and told the truth about that specific element. But it would have been even better if they told the truth in general about all of this stuff, because again, as I said before, I don't believe that any of these philosophies comes out of a vacuum. It's always a progression. There's always something taken from something else before it. And that's how we sort of progress forward. I mean, I was even, this is probably one of my favorite quotes from the Baha'is, of which I was a member for about a year and a half back in the 90s. If you reject one of the messengers of God, you reject them all. And if you accept one of the messengers of God, you accept them all. And that doesn't mean that you necessarily believe everything that's being said, but at least you are willing to consider the possibilities. I wanted to ask you one other thing about the power of words and the external world in which we live. When we take a look at, let's just say, our current events in our respective communities, it could even be the weather for that matter. That was the example that was given to me, but it also could be national or international. what do you think our role is in these events, even if we're not directly connected? I was told that I needed to go within to find out what my role is in that particular
Yeah,
event or circumstance.
that's what I was trying to say before.
Yeah.
Something that occurred to me today was, I think we're getting, addiction. There are all kinds of addictions. People are addicted to alcohol and sugar and drugs and money and shopping. And I think as a society, we're becoming addicted to anger, and to, just intemperance. And I think we all do it, this outrage culture, and someone does something outrageous. And so you think that the answer is to rail against it and be even more outraged. And so we just have this sort of speeding, and political figures across the board. It's just, the gloves are off.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes our endocrine systems we become, you get an adrenaline rush, and so physiologically, you're starting to get this. And I just think that is worrisome, that you got to pull yourself back. Like, silly little anecdote, but remember Larry Hagman from Dallas, the
Oh, yes.
TV? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently every Sunday he spent the entire day in silence.
Hmm.
And he just sort of removed himself, and he was just his way of powering down. And I know religious people do this as part of a matter of religious course, but pulling yourself back from the fray, pulling yourself back from the noise, pulling yourself back from the outrage culture, and, getting, everybody wants to get their licks in, and, everybody's got a competing point of view. I think, and everybody thinks they're right, and maybe they are, but I don't know. I think at the end of the day, we got to say, is this good for us? Is it good for us as individuals? Is it good for us as society? Remember Thumper's dad said, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say nothing at all. Well, yeah. I mean, globally, we're just completely violating Thumper's dad's rule, right? Yeah. Like, everybody's like, if you don't have anything nice to say, get on Twitter and just spew it out. So yeah. X, whatever they're calling it. So yeah. I don't know. I worry about that. I engage in.
And then of course you get accused. You. Yeah, but you get accused of being politically correct if you don't speak your mind.
Yeah, and I think we should talk to one another, but I think we should do it in a way that, and I can be as triggered as the next person, but we used to have a way to, I fundamentally believe that if you're most human beings, unless you're some fringe psychopath, most human beings want the same things, don't they? They want to look after the widows and the orphans. They want a peaceful world. So if everybody wants the same thing, we just have a different view about how to bring it about based on where we are in life and how we've been raised and what our abilities are. We used to be able to say, this is my perspective, the idea of perspective. Of course, we all have very different perspectives. And that used to be, tell me your perspective. You've asked me how many times in this, tell me your perspective. What do you think about this? All of a sudden, we just stopped wanting to hear other people's perspectives, and we can disagree.
Sure.
But I also think we're getting more calcified in the sense of, it takes a certain intention to say, I'm going to open myself up to your point of view, and I'm going to see it the way you see it, and I'm going to see if it will shift the way I think about things. And I just think we're becoming calcified, and we're losing flexibility, and it goes back to words. I mean, it just starts with this intemperance, and then people start saying things, and then the words turns into actions, and the actions turn into damage, and it's kind of a runaway train. And
yeah. Well, my brother and I had a conversation the night following my eldest sister's memorial, and I did not know this at the time, really, that he and I are both on opposite ends of the political spectrum specifically. But we had a conversation for a couple of hours. And at the outset of that conversation, once I was aware of where he was coming from, I consciously made the mental note. It doesn't matter what either of us believes. He is my brother and always will be. And he has a right to his perspective. It's neither right nor wrong, nor is mine. They're just different views. And when it was all said and done, I love the way the conversation he and I had came to an end, because my mother came out of the bedroom, and she said, "Boys, I was 63 at the time, and my brother was, I think, 60. Boys, it's 1:00." And I said, "Well, we're just about done here." But what we did was, whether we agreed or disagreed on the solutions to the problems or issues that we were talking about, we agreed on 3 things that needed to be resolved, that needed to be dealt with. I mean, that was something. Okay. And that, again, he is still my brother. And I am so proud of him for some of the things that he has done for my parents that I wish I could have done. And I'm not envious by any means. I'm proud of the fact that he took him to China for a couple of, I think it was for a couple of weeks, that they never would have been able to do otherwise, which I thought was fantastic. That's great. And he traveled. He worked for Disney and so forth. So I still have a brother. We are not estranged. We might have different views politically, but we're still brothers. And I'm saddened by the stories that I hear of people, husbands, wives, siblings, friends who just, they've gone down this rabbit hole, and it's like the rabbit hole is more important than the relationship. And that's what's so sad.
I agree. And it's blessed are the peacemakers, right?
Yeah.
And you enacted in your conflict of saying, you're a man of good faith, I'm a man of good faith, we don't agree. I may never agree with you. But I think what we've done is we've sort of, we're people are accusing one another of being an existential threat to one another.
Yeah.
On sides, and you're evil incarnate, and I'm evil incarnate, and I'm not evil incarnate, you are. They say that tyranny is the willful rejection of nuance. That when you refuse to see the nuances in things, and of course, if you can't stay calm and have those nuanced disagreements, right, you just immediately go to the most outrageous language and accusation and ad hominem attack, then there's no room for nuance anymore, right? There's no room for you to say, you know what, he took my parents to China. And so that's just part of that intemperance of just escalating and escalating. And I wonder how much of it, Richard, is physiologically based, that people are just kind of getting addicted to the adrenaline. Do you know what I mean? Of getting outraged. And I mean, I can do it myself. You can feel yourself getting all outraged. And then if you watch people who are good debaters, they lean back, kind of take breaths, because they're triggering. I know with animals that if an animal's adrenaline starts to go, an aggressive animal, if you ever used to watch that guy Cesar Millan, he would stop the animal short before its adrenaline could escalate, and it got into such a kill mode.
Right.
And I think humans kind of have a version of that they just get revved up and revved up and revved up, and then they're just no longer in control of what we're no longer in control of what we're saying and doing. And then, they either justify ourselves or, blame it on the other person, or, where we know where we went wrong, and then we can come back together and talk it out. But there seems to be less and less of that. So.
And that's unfortunate. What is also a little bit on the unfortunate side is that we end up coming to the end of these conversations, and I get revved up to do these conversations, whether my guest and I agree or don't or disagree. It doesn't really matter. One of my favorites was my guest shared a perspective, and then I shared my perspective, and he says, "Well," and he shared a counter to my perspective, and I pondered it for a few seconds, and I'm going, "Well, there goes another one of my straw huts up in flames." And I'll tell you what, I'm willing to burn them all down to start over again. Again, I go back to that phrase. It is better to begin in doubt and end in certainty than to begin in certainty and end in doubt. but I have no doubt that you are going to be very successful with this work and others that you have done. Penelope Holt, who is a combination of things. In addition to a New Yorker now, she is also a novelist, a playwright, a business writer, a market executive as well. And you've written a number of other works, and one of them that we'll talk about the next time we have you on is The Emotional Intelligence at Work, and even talk about the story of singing God's work. But we'll get into that next time, and I thank you so much for giving us so much time here on the program.
Thank you, Richard. I really enjoyed it. It was a really good conversation. Thank you.
I have three final questions I like to ask you that I ask all of my guests at the end of the program. But before I do, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. New paradigms for a new world, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m. And we are also Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. following the news, and streaming live at those times at richarddugan.com, with podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher. We're also on YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope you'll subscribe and click notification, so when I post a new conversation such as this one, you will be notified and you can tune in and listen. And I hope that you will. I also hope that you will help us out financially. We can use all the help we can get, as a lot of folks are. If you can, we have a PayPal account. It's there for your security as well as ours. And when you go to the PayPal account, they're going to ask you, to whom are you sending this? The email address they'll ask you for is richard@richarddugan.com. That's richard@richarddugan.com. And also spend some time going within and listening to that still small voice. Spending that time in that quiet, peaceful, calm place. We really encourage that, especially when things are kind of chaotic in the outside world. You know, so to speak, euphemistically or metaphorically, pull your head in like a tortoise and just sit calmly and quietly and ponder and ponder. With all of that being said, we now ask our final three questions of our very special guest, author of the book, The Angel Scroll. And the first of those three questions is, who is Penelope Holt?
Who am I? I was born in the north of England. So and we say I'm English by birth, Yorkshire by the grace of God. Because we're very proud Yorkshire people. I think it's probably like Texans, I don't know. I'm a writer. I love words. I've always loved words. Storyteller. I think that stories are everything, that we shape our world by the stories that we tell. And sometimes, like to your point, we fill in the pieces, like Jesus's loincloth, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We take different pieces, fabrications and realities, and craft them. And who, you know, that was the whole postmodern movement of what is the truth anyway, although there is truth, certainly. And I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a business person, a friend, a sister, and those are the most important things. And if I can, I've got the energy, I'm a tango dancer.
Wow. The forbidden dance. Aha.
Yeah, I went to Argentina, to Buenos Aires, which is the, you know, of course, the home of tango, and it was great. It was a fun trip.
What gets you up in the morning?
Curiosity. And what a time to be alive with the internet, that you can literally, I remember when we were kids and we had the encyclopedia, an out-of-date collection of the Encyclopedia Britannica and a library card, and the idea that I can go on and download or watch, stream like Harvard lectures on comparative religion, and I can listen to, you know, podcasts from some of the greatest minds in the world and get the benefit of knowledge and history. And I mean, that's just for a curious person who loves to learn. I mean, it's paradise. That's what gets me up in the morning.
And finally, what was your best day?
The day that my son was born. I played Ode to Joy for 6 weeks after he was born.
That actually was the first song I learned to play on the piano when I was in 8th grade. So very familiar to me as well. Well, once again, thank you so much for being with us here on Tell Me Your Story and sharing your story and your insights and your perspective with yours truly, as well as our listeners and viewers. And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.